Welcome to this version of InfoTouch University Online. This session is going to cover the Transform Inventory module, and we will go in depth into this function in both Storekeeper POS and Store Manager. Functionality is the same for our two POS software lines. As you might guess, Transform Inventory can be found in the Inventory module, and it's right here, this brown button. Transform Inventory is used to modify groups of related inventory items. And when I say groups, there are a wide variety of ways that you can specify what items you wish to modify. Probably the most common usage of Transform Inventory is for changing prices. So let's start with that, and then we'll go on. As you can see, there's quite a few additional fields that we can modify using this powerful feature. So if we go into price levels, our first tab, and this should look very familiar to anybody who's run the inventory reports because it's literally identical in terms of how we can select records here. We can default to going from to item number. If we leave the from and to blank, we're actually specifying all inventory. So this would actually change the pricing on every single item if we did that. We can also go in with ranges of UPC items, departments, where we specify from and to departments, or department groups if you have them. Department groups are most commonly used in salons, but are certainly available for any vertical. And so if, for example, you wanted to set the pricing on your products items in a salon, but not your service items, this would allow you to do that. Lastly, within a specific department, you can specify which departments you want to modify, and then the breakdowns or indices. In this case, for coolers, we've got brand, flavor, and size. If we went to beer, we'd have type, brand, and size. So however that department is broken down, both in terms of the way you enter it into inventory, as well as how you ring up items by description in the register module, you get that kind of flexibility. So for example, if I wanted to change all of my M&M's candies regardless of size, I could go ahead and type in M&M's in the from and to, and this would actually allow me to update only my M&M items. But let's go ahead for now and say, as long as we're in my candy department, that I'm going to put all of my candy on sale. So again, by leaving the from and to blank, we're basically saying start at the beginning, go to the end, but this is within the candy department itself. And what we're doing here can be shown in the Details tab. You're going to see this transform type come up for every one of these fields pretty much, with a couple exceptions. But very common. The pricing has a few more options than you would normally see in some of the other fields, and we'll get to those in a minute or two. So let's start out and see what we have on this screen. And this is by far the most complicated of the screens you'll see in Transform Inventory. You'll start out showing relative percent. Okay, so what we're saying at this transform type is I want to change the items, the prices of the items, in this case in my candy department, and what do I want to do with them? Well, for example, let's say that all of your candy items went up by 10%. We put in a 10 in the transform amount, and leaving the rest of this alone for a second, what we're going to say is that all of my candy items go up by 10% immediately. Or if I put in a negative number, it'll reduce it by that percentage amount. Same thing with regards to dollars. So this would be $5 off, or perhaps $1 increase. Probably most common is that you're not necessarily using a relative percent or dollar change to prices, to costs, and to other types of fields. You simply want to set the actual price or quantity or cost or what have you. So if I wanted to set all of my candy items to $1.79, the absolute dollar setting says make it the retail price, whatever is in this transform amount. So as you can see, transform is very flexible. And let's take a look at some of the options here beyond that. It's called transform price levels because you can not only transform or change groups of items at the retail price level, but for any of the price levels that you have set up. So you'll always see retail here, and if you have additional price levels, you can specify those as well. If you have multiple units of measure, and here we're in a liquor store, so if I were dealing with my beer items, and let's say I was consistent about how I specify the units of measure, so I buy my beer by the case, my first and default selling unit might be a 6-pack, followed by a single and maybe a 12-pack. Now this can be specified differently for every single item, so we can't really do more than allow you to specify which ordinal unit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 you want to change. By default, you're going to change the stocking unit, which for items with no multiple units of measure is the only unit you have available. If I did this right now, I get a message, and I'm going to see this message a lot as we go through this. We're going to modify a range of items. It could be a small number or a large number, but once you start, you can't stop. Now, it typically doesn't take very long, but you do need to know that once you click on yes, it's a done deal. So I'm going to click no here and go back and look at some of the other options we have. And some of these are only, the rest of these, in fact, are only applicable to our price level changes, including retail. So let's say, for example, I want to put my candy items on sale, and I want to schedule that sale. So I'm going to switch back to relative percent, and let's say I'm going to take 15% off of all my candy items, but I don't want it to happen immediately and permanently. Instead, I want to schedule what the start date is. So it defaults to today, but I can simply use the calendar and say, you know what, let's start on the 28th of March. Now, by default, if we continue on with this, we are making a permanent change to the item. So starting March 28th, let's say, for example, you have tobacco items here. It's very common in tobacco in a liquor store for those items to go through regular price changes that are not promotional in nature but are permanent. So if we knew all of our tobacco items were going to be 15% off starting March 28th, this would do it. A lot of times, though, in retail, and this is true almost across the board in all the markets we serve, you don't want to make permanent changes. You want to make temporary sale changes. And here we can click the change type and go ahead and get our options. Now, if you do want to make a temporary or sale change, I strongly suggest you ignore this middle option of promotional. Promotional is an older feature. So what happens with promotional changes is we actually save off the retail price at the time the change is made and then restore it at the end of the sale period, which you get to specify here. But more commonly nowadays, we use a new field that wasn't available at the time the promotional change was first written. There is an inventory field called sale price, and it has an end date associated with it. So rather than having to save the original price and then restore it at the end, we simply note in the record, we'll leave the retail price alone, but note that it's on sale starting March 28th until April 1st. And this not only simplifies the processing, it also enables you to very easily compare what the sale price is to the regular retail price, which you cannot do that easily on promotional changes because the original retail price is stored somewhere else. So using some of the fields in the invoice formatter, if you use sale price, you can easily tell the customer this item's on sale, you save $2.37. In addition, by default, when we are scheduling a change in advance, While it's on sale, we will disable discounts. So the item's non-discountable flag will be set. We don't want to have double dip, if you would, on the discounting side. So when the item's on sale, no other discounts can apply to it. Also, we're not going to allow you to use our quantity price breaks, like buy 3, get 1 free, while the item's on sale. Now, that is by default. If you want to allow multiple discounts and quantity price breaks, you simply have to uncheck those checkboxes. But by default, again, they will be checked, and you won't get those additional discounts. However, at the end of the price range, of the sale range on April 1st, or in this case actually April 2nd, because April 1st is the last day of the promotion, we will go ahead and restore whatever the original settings were for the non-discountable flag and the quantity price breaks. So it's pretty convenient to do sales. All right. Let's see some other things in our price level side of things. If we are reducing the price of an item, we can say, and this is typically done for just permanent changes, but you have the option for any kind of change. Go ahead and switch this back to permanent so it makes more sense. So if I'm going to knock the price of my items, and this is more typically, by the way, done in clothing and shoe stores. I've got a line of jeans that's just not selling well. Starting March 28th, I'm going to knock the price down by 15%, but I want to record that price difference along with a reason, and we're going to record this in the markdown fields of the item record as well as the markdown audit trail. When your vendor for this item comes in and you run a couple of reports, you're easily able to show them, hey, I took a bath on these jeans, I had to mark down 100 pairs by $10, that's $1,000, and I had to do that because they weren't selling and or unpopular or poor quality or whatever you want to record here, and allows you to beat up that vendor and get some better pricing on maybe something else. Another option here when we're changing the pricing, this is a comparatively recent option, is the ability to round. So a lot of stores, here we're going to do the calculation. Let's say the item is $1. If we subtract 15% off of it, it's now going to be 85 cents. But in a lot of stores, my dollar example is not too helpful here. Let's say it was 99 cents to begin with, and we're going to knock 15% off, and it'll still be 85 cents. A lot of stores don't price things in exact pennies. They like to have, for example, the last digit be a 9, so 89, 79, 99, or a 7 or a 5, whatever they choose. It could be 1 digit or 2 digits, although 1 digit is most common. What we have with the round to options is the way to say, okay, let's take that calculation on what the new price is and round it to the nearest 9 or the nearest 7 or what have you. So let's say I put in 9, and using my example here of 85, the nearest 9 would be 89 because that's only 4 cents away versus 6 cents for 79. Other options include the next higher 9. So even if 79 was closer than 89, the next higher one would force us to go up. Next lower would force us to go down. In addition, you can specify a 2-digit price. So if you want everything, for example, to end in 99, you can do it this way. The default is none, in which case we're not going to round the amount at all. We're simply going to do the math, take the price, multiply it by the transform amount, and whatever that comes out to the nearest penny is what you're going to wind up with. Okay, let's take some other examples here, and let's use some different price levels now. And I'm not going to worry about scheduling these for the time being. So let's say I wanted to set my frequent buyer pricing, and I want to set it to 5% less than my retail price. That can be done in 2 steps. First of all, you set the frequent buyer to retail. By the way, notice when it's set to retail, doesn't make any sense to set the retail price to retail, so we gray it out for you. But it's available for any of the price levels, so we transform it. And I'll go ahead and do this right now. You'll see that's very quick. Let's go back in, and we're on our candy items. And now all of my candy items have a frequent buyer price that are equal to my retail. So if I want to set them to 10% below my retail, I now do a second transform, minus 10, and now every candy item is set to 10% below retail. So let's take a look at one. Let's take a look at a more interesting one. Let's go for Butterfingers 2 ounces. The retail price is 69 cents. The frequent buyer price is 62 cents, 10% less. You can do the same kind of thing above cost typically, and it could be above the current cost or the average cost. So again, a two-step process to say, let's make my frequent buyer pricing 5% above my average cost. First, we set it to average cost. Then we go back in and use relative percent, and now we use a positive number to increase it above my average cost. So there you have it. That is pretty much everything that we have on the transform price levels, which is, as I mentioned, by far the most comprehensive and complex of the fields that we can modify with transform inventory. Let's go through the rest of them now in order. The price levels is by far the most commonly used, but I do think there's lots of value in many of the other fields, and that is perhaps overlooked by some of our resellers, so I definitely want to share this with you. So on cost, again, we get the same selection options, and this is going to be something you're going to see fairly frequently. Now, lots of those details disappeared, but we can knock down the cost or bump it up by a relative percent, a relative dollar amount, or set it to a specific dollar amount. Profit type, a little bit different here in that if we look at the retail record, what we're talking about modifying with profit type is this field here. So this field determines how the gross profit margin is displayed, either as a percentage that is calculated based on the cost and the price, or a fixed percentage where we enter in the profit margin and let the system calculate the retail price, or a fixed dollar amount where we put in a dollar amount. And again, the system calculates the retail price. You'll notice it's grayed out. We cannot change it at this point. The only thing we can change is the profit in either dollar or percentage basis. And then finally, the most common is calculated. So back to our profit type, we get to specify for the range of items selected whether we want them to set to calculated, fixed percentage, or fixed dollar. Not honestly used a whole lot, but it's there. Much more common would be to go ahead and set the actual profit associated with it. And by the way, it does not matter what your profit type is set to. We will do the math and convert it back. So for example, if you were set to a fixed dollar profit type but said you wanted to set all these items to a 45% absolute margin, we would do the calculation in percentages and then convert it to a dollar amount for you. Alternatively, if you're most commonly set to a percentage type profit and you say, I want to keep $2 in margin, we, for each of the items that you change, would go ahead and figure out what that margin would be and then convert it back to a percentage. So you don't have to worry what the profit type is when you're changing the margin. We'll do it for you. You can set the profit margin as an absolute percentage, a relative dollar amount, or an absolute dollar amount. If that item does, therefore, based on this change, get its retail price reduced, you can also, again, specify that this reduction, which would be the individual retail price multiplied by the quantity on hand, would be applied to the markdowns. And again, a reason would display on the markdown audit trail report. That, by the way, is here under any of our audit trail reports. There's the markdown audit. All right, we've done price levels. Let's do tax categories. So let's say, for example, your state has traditionally not had food items, for example, in a market or convenience store, that type of environment. Let's say food items have traditionally not been taxed. And due to the budget concerns that most states are having these days, the state has decided, you know what, we need the money, we're going to start taxing all of our food items. Well, rather than doing it item by item, we might go into a department group if you had multiple food departments. I don't think we actually have any food departments per se in here, but you get the idea. Let's say that they've decided to tax sodas, and sodas were not previously taxed. What we can do here is one of two things. We can set the transform type to tax categories, which outside of Canada is what you're only going to be concerned about. We'll cover the other one in a second. And in this case, you would get a listing of your tax categories. This particular vertical and file set's only set up for a single tax category called tax, but you might have, for example, a state tax, a county tax, perhaps a municipal tax if you're in city limits. You would set that up under set up tax categories. Each of the taxing authorities would display in this area that's mostly blank right now. If I left it like this, what I'm saying is don't unlink any of these items to tax. This would say, I want it to be taxable. If you are in Canada, you may have to deal with something called goods and services tax. And in some provinces in Canada, the GST, as it's abbreviated, is treated as a value-added tax, which is to say that when you ring up the item, rather than showing that the item is $2 and the tax on it is 12 cents below the line in the separate tax display, you ring up the item at $2.12 and the tax does not display. So that's just something done in, not only in Canada, but in a lot of European countries, and something that is being batted around here in the United States as something we may impose in the future, or maybe not. If we do, we're certainly ready for it. And you would select among your tax categories what the VAT category would be for the item selected, or that you want to unlink those items from any VAT category by selecting none. Again, unless you're in Canada, you won't, in the short term, need to worry about this. So either make items taxable, and this could be state tax, county tax, municipal tax, each of them independently settable. So, if your city does not charge for milk and your state does, you would click check on sales tax for the state and uncheck on the sales tax for the city. Sources is a very helpful one. Okay, sources is InfoTouch speak for the link between your items and your vendors. So what you can do is, again, specify departments or ranges of items that you want to change. And if that item is currently sourced by a vendor, and bear in mind we have up to 10 vendors that can be linked to each item, we can change the amount that that item is costing us, that the vendor supplies it to, by a percentage, relative dollar, or absolute dollar amount, or we can set it directly to the current cost of the item. So the current cost is maintained separately from the cost per vendor. Let's take a look at that. Let's go ahead and first view our candy items. So that's been set up beforehand to be linked to a couple of vendors here. So here's the cost from ABC Liquor Supply. Here's the cost from 123 Beer Distribution. And the current cost is the same as the average cost, but it may not be. And Transform could therefore allow you to quickly set it to either the current cost, again, a relative percentage or dollar amount above what it's currently sitting at, or a specific cost that you enter. Let's take a look at one more item, and I'll show you another usage for Transform sources. Under our tobacco department, we currently don't have any vendors set up for any of these items. So putting in a vendor is an optional thing, and you can choose not to do so. But over time, as you want to generate purchase orders automatically, it is a requirement for you to do so. We can't generate a purchase order to a non-existent vendor. And Transform Inventory also allows you to go ahead and establish a vendor as a new source, including the first or additional sources for this item. So let's go back, and by the way, under my Windows menu, I haven't actually closed Transform Inventory, so it's still there. We'll go back to our sources. I'm going to select tobacco. I'm going to use all items in the tobacco department. And what I'm going to do is set it to the current cost, so the Transform amount grays out because we're going to take it from the item record. And we're going to say that we can either select from a drop-down list of vendor numbers or use our binoculars to actually find them either by number or by description, by their name. So let's select ABC Liquor Supply, vendor number 1. And I'm going to check this box here. So if I don't check this box and this item is not sourced by, well, any item being changed is not sourced by vendor number 1, we're going to skip it because there's nothing to change. But this says, okay, if they're not currently in the list of vendors that supply this item, add them to that list. So a very quick and easy way to go ahead and set up a range of items to be sourced from a specific vendor. And this could be done over time, but it's probably most typically useful when you're initially setting up your items for a new store. And we'll go ahead and do that. And if I go back to my view inventory side of things and go to the next record, oops, that did not work actually. All righty, let's try that one more time. Oh, sorry, I'm not looking. All right, let's try this again. We'll go to tobacco, details, set the cost, vendor 1, create new source, and let's see if I can do it this time. There we go. So ABC Liquor Supply is now a vendor for every single item in the tobacco department, which is quite a few items, and it does it very, very quickly. In fact, in terms of speed, let's go ahead to the next item, and I'm going to set the minimum quantity. This is the next field we have. I'm going to set it for every item. By leaving from to item number blank and selecting order by item number, I will hit every single item in inventory. And let's say I decide, for whatever reason, I'm going to set up my minimum quantity to be 5 for every item. So it's going to now update literally every single item in inventory, and watch how quickly this happens. Boom, done. As for how many items we changed, I don't know how many items we have in the inventory database, but if we go into the utility module and look up information, you'll notice that we actually have 2,565 items, and it happened pretty much in the blink of an eye. So Transform Inventory is an extremely quick function. Even if you have tens of thousands of items, it's not going to take you a long time. Minimum, maximum, and reorder quantities, typically used for setting things up in advance for generating purchase orders automatically. When our quantity on hand goes below the minimum, actually plus the quantity on order, we will order automatically up to the maximum quantity, and if you set the reorder quantity, we'll do it in multiples of the reorder quantity. All of them look the same in terms of the details. You can change the existing quantities by a relative percent or quantity, or set it absolutely. Okay, our next field is group discount. Now, if you're not familiar with group discount, it is a way of tying items together. Let's go ahead into one of our inventory items so we can look at it. So here we have a domestic Zinfandel, and here's the group discount item field. And what this allows you to do is to tie multiple items together for purposes of things like quantity price breaks. So, for example, let's say I'm a typical liquor store, and I'm going to give any customer that comes in a 10% discount after they buy 12 bottles of wine. That looks like this in our software. So retroactively, meaning once we get to 12, we're going to go back to the original 11 that were rung up and give all 12 of them a 10% discount. Well, the way this looks right now, this is only going to happen for this bottle of Zinfandel. If I want to do this for all wines, then I set one item up as my master, if you would, for the discount, and then put in the group discount item number here. So this item is 27264. Let's go ahead and save this off. Let's go to my next wine. If I put in 27264, you'll notice it just copies the setting from that group discount or master item, if you would. And what this function in Transform does is, instead of setting it item by item, I can go into my wines and say that all of my wines are going to have a group discount number of 27264, or however you want to put it. You can also use the binoculars here to actually find the item by description. So if you don't know the item number off the top of your head, but you do know that it's a domestic Abundance Zinfandel, this will simply pull the item number directly from the record. If I hit Transform, all of my group discount items will be set to this particular item number, and therefore any 12 bottles of wine will give me a discount. You can also, for a range of items, set the non-discountable flag. And options are allow discounts or make it non-discountable. That will set this flag in the Special Features tab to non-discountable. And a non-discountable item, as its name implies, does not let you apply either sale or line item discounts to this item. So you already got it on sale, for example. We don't want to bother anymore with giving additional discounts, so we can set it up for a range of items this way. Another field in the inventory record is weight, and like all these other fields, you can set the weight for a range of items. You can, using our typical formulation that we saw in minimum and maximum quantities, do a relative percent or quantity change, or simply set absolutely the weight for the item. Weights have two purposes in our software. One, and it's either or, you can either use the weight for calculating the freight costs of an item. So when you have a purchase order with 10 different items on it, or let's say you've got 2 different items. You're ordering bricks and you're ordering some balloons. Well, if you don't have a weight associated with the item, we have no way to understand how much to allocate to the bricks versus the balloons. Presumably, if you order a purchase order, most of the freight costs are going to be associated with those bricks. You tell us how much they weigh. You set up an option in set up miscellaneous, as it turns out. Let's take a look at that one real quick. So it's set up, miscellaneous, and in tab 2, you get to spread the PO freight costs either not at all, by quantity, or by weight. And by weight would be far the most accurate. The other alternative feature that you can use for weights is tare weights. So if I'm in a deli or some kind of market where I'm putting stuff on a scale in a package, and I have a standard weight for the item that packaging is, how much that packaging weighs, we can set that up in the weight field, and then when you weigh the item, we will automatically subtract the tare weight from the amount read from the scale. Actually, by the way, it's no longer dependent, and this is actually quite new, on having a scale. It used to be, but tare weights will also be subtracted even if you enter the weights manually. Okay, so that's weights. Loyalty points. These fields, by the way, will be grayed out if you don't have a loyalty points program enabled, because there's no, no pun intended, point to it. But if you wanted to set up, for example, all of my liquor items to give me 25 loyalty points, we do it that way. That's the points that we earn from purchasing them. There is a completely separate option as to how many points it takes to redeem them. Again, we could do the same thing. Maybe choose a different department. I can buy beer. This is probably a terrible example, actually, because it's probably not allowed in a lot of states to do this. But in any event, let's say I can buy beer if I've accumulated 150 points or what have you. So that corresponds to what you see here in the item record. It's in the Performance tab. How many points do you earn when you buy it? Can it be bought with points? By the way, if you set the points to redeem to 0, that's equivalent to unchecking this. If you do want them to be able to buy it, you check it and then put in a non-zero amount for the points to buy. And that covers it for our transform inventory function. You will notice there's two other options for matrix create and modify. I'm not going to cover them today, but if you are interested, there is a webinar already recorded up on our website called the matrix feature, and it goes into these functions in depth. So rather than going over it again, please just refer to that webinar. We have recently changed the structure of the folders on our partner portal for webinars. When you open up the webinars folder at this point, rather than getting a list of all of the webinars, they are broken down into introductory and advanced separate folders. So they are what they imply, and you will find the matrix feature in the advanced folder under webinars. And with that, we will conclude this edition of InfoTouch University Online. Thank you.